If you look at everything that China is doing, it is very, very significant because what China wants to do is to break the link between the US, the UK, and Europe. So if and when, sadly, there is a war in the Pacific, we will be so in hock to Chinese economic supply lines, and our dependency will be so great that we will not support the US, and that's the end of the West.
Let's get a political angle on the Chinese influence in government with Bob Seeley, the former Conservative MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who's a China critic. Well, Bob joins me now. So, Bob, the Times has been told that the government will resist formally designating China as a risk to Britain after major companies, including HSBC and Standard Chartered, raised concerns. What's your reaction to that?
Hi, good afternoon, Roy. Good afternoon to your listeners. My reaction is that whatever happens with China, we need a coherent and consistent policy, and we don't have one. Half the time we're treating it as a de facto threat, and half the time we're treating it as a de facto opportunity. We need to have a consistent approach, and we do not. And stories like this just keep on happening because the United Front, as well as espionage, there is also a significant Chinese influence operation in this country. And we are willfully blind to this and have been for years.
So, Bob, you've said that Andrew has been what you described as a useful idiot for China. That's one description for him. But that he's not the only one. So who else are you referring to?
Well, there have been quite a few incidents in recent years about people who are either on trial or have been warned against by MI5 for not so much just naked espionage or, hidden espionage, clearly, but this sort of grey area where an organization like the Chinese Communist Party's United Front works in, where this sort of grey area between friendship and influence peddling is maybe short of direct espionage, maybe not. Where infiltration of institutions and manipulation of the narrative and influencing government and business is as important, potentially more important, than simply espionage and information collecting.
And can I ask, Bob, just finally, how big a national security breach do you think all of this actually is?
If you look at everything that China is doing, it is very, very significant because what China wants to do is to break the link between the US, the UK, and Europe. So if and when, sadly, there is a war in the Pacific, we will be so in hock to Chinese economic supply lines, and our dependency will be so great that we will not support the US, and that's the end of the West.
Can I ask, Bob, do you think there's an issue in terms of timing, in terms of how long H6 potentially wasn't clocked meeting two former prime ministers? Or do you think the spooks were on this and wanted to let it play out for a bit?
I wish the spooks were on it, but I don't think they were. The spooks that I've talked to when I was an MP were very clear. They said, look, we have concerns. Clearly, I'm talking to the ones that have concerns. Maybe there were others that didn't. But the spooks that I was talking said that we have concerns. But the fact is, we don't get listened to because the politicians don't want to know, because China is golden age. It's all invest, 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 which I think is totally out of date by now anyway. And therefore, there was a lack of interest in some of the more malign activity.
One of the really big questions, Bob, that's been sort of brewing since the weekend, since this broke last week, is whether or not H6 should be named. There's an anonymity order at the moment. You just Google him and he comes up. Do you think MPs using their parliamentary privilege to name the spy, despite the court anonymity order, is useful or necessary?
I think it's potentially useful. It depends what the court order is for. Look, if you've got a court order protecting a child because of things that adults have done around that child, clearly, then using parliamentary privilege to name a child, for example, would be completely wrong. But in this case, where you have a alleged very high-profile agent of influence, I do think our courts are not necessarily doing our state a favour by insisting on anonymity, especially when you go online, you can find the name. So I hope somebody does stand up in the House of Commons and name him because his name's out there.
Well, we shall soon see. My thanks to Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP. Thank you so much for joining me, Bob. Can I just ask you a little bit about sort of the story of the moment about this whole China issue and H6? So in the last sort of couple of hours, the Times has been told that the Labour government is actually going to resist formally designating China as a risk to Britain after major companies, including HSBC and Standard Chartered, raised concerns. Can I just ask your reaction to that?
I think it's something that has to be held under very close review. In my constituency, we have one of the largest populations in the UK of Hong Kongers who have largely come over in the last couple of years as a result of the actions that China has been taking there, and making sure that we have a robust approach to human rights abuses undertaken by China, and where they are sort of threatening UK national security is something that we need to be very, very alive to. But it's also important that we get it right in how we do it and not rush to making decisions which could have unforeseen consequences.
So, personally, do you think it's right that H6 is named in the Commons? Is that something you'd like to see or not?
I would be really interested to read more about why the decision was taken that he should be anonymous, because it strikes me as a little bit baffling, not least because there might be other witnesses or people that he has engaged with who might be able to come forward to help with the investigation here. So I think it's something that will be probably in the next couple of days, a question that is answered. And then at that point, I think we can make a decision about whether or not that naming order should hold.
Okay. Well, Charlotte Nichols, Labour MP for Warrington North, thank you so much for joining me. It's really interesting to hear your take on all of that. Now, changing tack for just a moment, let me tell you about the Times Literary Supplement's Books of the Year for 2024. Writers including William Boyd, Bernardine Evaristo and Tom Holland picked their favourite books of the year. And you can subscribe today for just £1 a month for 4 months. Visit the-tls.co.uk. Coming up, how did Bashar al-Assad smuggle $250 million in banknotes from Damascus to Moscow? That's all after the news on Times Radio